He crossed first. The crowd exploded. The cameras caught the moment. For a heartbeat, it looked like the biggest prize in American horse racing had been claimed in plain sight. And then the victory began to rot in real time. The cheers lost their shape. The celebration froze where it stood. Replays flickered across the screens like evidence from a crime scene. And in the space of a few agonizing minutes, the truth everyone thought they had witnessed was dragged into a room full of doubt, judgment, and fury. This is not just the story of a controversial derby. This is the story of a public coronation that turned into a public unraveling. Because when the horse who gets there first does not get to keep the glory, the race is no longer over. It becomes a wound, cold open, the moment everything broke. At Churchill Downs, the finish looked final. Maximum Security had done what champions are supposed to do. He had survived the crush, mastered the pressure, and reached the wire before anyone else. For a few breathless seconds, history seemed settled. The crowd believed what it had seen. The track believed what it had heard. The sport itself appeared ready to hand over the roses and move on. But then, something shifted, not on the dirt, not among the horses. Inside the air itself, the objections started coming in. The replays started rolling. The certainty began to drain out of the building. What should have been release became tension. What should have been triumph became suspicion. And just like that, the most important race in America stopped being about speed, courage, and nerve. It became about judgment. It became about blame. It became about whether the finish line had really settled anything at all. On Derby Day, the winner is supposed to be decided when the race ends. In this derby, the ending was where the damage began. Set the stakes. Why this race mattered. The Kentucky Derby is not just a race. It is the race. The one even outsiders recognize. The one people who never place a bet, never study a form, never follow the sport, still stop to watch. It is where horses stop being talented and start becoming immortal. It is where trainers gamble whole careers for a few perfect minutes. It is where jockeys carry more than weight in the saddle. They carry legacy. Win here, and your name enters a place the sport never forgets. Lose here, and the silence can last for years. That is what made Maximum Security such a dangerous presence walking into Churchill Downs. He was unbeaten, unshaken. He carried the kind of momentum that makes a horse feel bigger than the field around him, as if he were not merely entering the derby, but arriving to claim it. He did not look like one more contender in a crowded gate. He looked like the horse everyone else would have to survive. And on a day like this, losing is not just failure. It is the disappearance of a moment you may never touch again. The race begins. Control, pressure, and position. From the break, Maximum Security ran like a horse, with no interest in asking permission. There was no hesitation in him, no wasted movement, no sense that he was waiting for the race to reveal itself. He went forward and took hold of it. Around him, the Derby field churned with danger, crowded, nervous, loaded with the kind of chaos that can swallow a favourite whole if he blinks at the wrong time. But he never blinked. He placed himself exactly where power lives in a race like this, near the front, above the panic, dictating the shape of the storm instead of being buried inside it. He was fast, but more than that, he was composed, aggressive, but never out of control, strong, but never frantic. This was not some desperate front-running theft. This was possession. Every stride made him look more like the horse the moment demanded. Every second made the rest of the field look as if it were reacting to him, not the other way around. And that is what made what came later feel so violent? Because at this stage, everything still looked clean. Everything still looked earned. He was not stealing history. He was taking it with both hands. Then came the moment that split the race open. Not the finish, not the ruling, the fracture before the fracture. Maximum security, still battling through the stretch, drifted outward. It happened in an instant. So fast the eye almost wants to excuse it, almost wants to call it nothing. But in the derby, nothing is ever just nothing. One move becomes many consequences. One shift becomes many reactions. Horses behind him checked. Lines disappeared. Momentum broke apart. And suddenly the clean image of a horse taking control of the biggest race in America was no longer clean at all. It had become contaminated by doubt. Was this normal pressure in a crowded stretch? Or was this interference, plain and decisive, the kind the stewards could not ignore, no matter how badly the sport wanted a simple ending? That is the fault line the entire story rests on, because this is where certainty dies. This is the split second where the derby stopped being a race and became a judgment. And still, when the wire came, it was maximum security in front. That was the image burned into the minds of millions. The leader at the finish. The horse still standing where glory is supposed to stand. In that instant, the emotions of sport did what they always do. They rushed toward the visible truth. The horse in front had won. The story was over. That is how people understand racing. That is how people understand justice in competition. The one who gets there first takes the moment and keeps it. And that is why this derby still hurts. Because the emotional truth was immediate, powerful, and almost impossible to argue with. The apparent winner had carried the pressure and reached the line before everyone else. But horse racing has never belonged entirely to the eye. In this sport, the wire can feel final without actually being final. If the stewards believed the path to the finish violated the rules, then even a victory witnessed by everyone can be torn apart afterward. That is where the audience begins to split against itself. One side says the winner was right there in front of us. The other says first is meaningless if first was not clean. And once those two truths collide, nothing about the finish feels safe anymore. After the race, Churchill Downs did not sound like a place celebrating greatness. It sounded like a place bracing for impact. The roar that should have rolled into joy collapsed into a nervous, suspended hush. Maximum security had finished first, yet the result suddenly felt unstable, as if the ground beneath the derby had started to move. Replays flashed again and again. Riders were questioned. Objections hung over the track like a gathering storm. One of the key objections came from the connections of Country House, and with every passing minute, the most basic question in sports became impossible to answer. Who actually won? That is what made the wait so cruel. It was not just long, it was suffocating. The Kentucky Derby is supposed to deliver certainty in an instant. One race, one finish, one winner. Instead, the biggest stage in the sport became a theatre of hesitation. Every replay deepened the dread. Every second made the silence heavier. It was the longest 30 minutes in Derby history, not simply because time passed slowly, but because everyone in that place understood that history was either about to be confirmed or ripped apart in public. Then the ruling came, and with it one of the coldest shocks the sport had ever delivered. The stewards disqualified maximum security for interference in the stretch. In a single decision, the horse who had finished first in the Kentucky Derby was stripped of the race and dropped all the way to 17th. The image people trusted was shattered on the spot. In his place rose Country House, a 65-1 outsider, transformed in an instant from the horse who had finished behind the apparent winner into the horse the record book would now crown. It was the first time in Derby history that an apparent winner had been disqualified for interference, and that alone made the moment feel unreal. But the real violence of the ruling lay deeper than that. Everyone had just watched one horse win. Then they were told that horse had not won at all. The horse that won the race lost the race. That is why the moment still echoes far beyond horse racing. It did not merely reorder the finish. It attacked the meaning of the finish itself. So why did they do it? The steward's answer was straightforward, even if the consequences were seismic. In their judgment, maximum security drifted outward and interfered with the progress of other horses behind him. To them, this was not harmless drift under pressure. It was a decisive movement that forced rivals to steady, adjust, and lose ground at the exact point in the race where every inch matters most. Under that standard, the issue was not whether the crowd loved the finish. It was not whether the apparent winner looked like the best horse. It was whether his actions damaged the fairness of the contest. And that is where the fire still burns. One side hears that and says the rules have to matter most when the stakes are highest. If interference happened, then the Derby cannot become a place where the rulebook bends for drama. The other side sees the first horse home and believes you should never erase that truth unless the fowl clearly changed who would have won. That tension is what keeps the story alive. The ruling came from regulation. The fury came from what people felt they had seen taken away. The instant the ruling became official, the Derby turned into a battlefield. Anger surged through the stands, through betting windows, through television broadcasts, through every corner of the sport at once. Fans were furious because they had watched maximum security finish first with their own eyes. And now they were being told that what they had seen no longer counted the way they thought it did. Bettors stood stunned, hit by the kind of reversal that feels less like a loss and more like reality being rewritten after the event. Commentators split into hostile camps almost immediately. Some defended the call and said the rulebook had to mean something, especially on the sport's grandest stage. Others called it the most devastating officiating decision the Derby had ever suffered, a moment when the finish line lost its authority and interpretation took its place. That is why the backlash exploded beyond racing. This was no longer only about one foul, one review, one judgment. It became a fight about sports justice itself. Did the officials protect the rulebook or rewrite the result? That question struck so hard because Country House became the official winner without giving the public the one image people trust most in all of sport, finishing first. And once that trust cracks, outrage spreads like fire. The race ended that night. The war did not. The owners of maximum security refused to let the ruling settle quietly into the record book. From their point of view, the greatest victory of their horse's life had not been lost in open competition. It had been taken away after the competition was already over. That belief gave the story a second life. It kept the anger alive long after the roses had been placed on Country House. But while the emotional case raged on, the legal case moved with colder logic. Courts eventually upheld the steward's decision, leaving Country House as the official winner of the Kentucky Derby. And that is what makes the aftermath so strange, so haunting. Emotionally, the story never closed. Officially, it did. Fans kept arguing about fairness, about evidence, about what victory is supposed to mean. The law did not. Legally, the matter was finished. The argument stayed alive. The result did not. And in that split between feeling and finality, the derby found a way to remain unfinished forever. What makes the 2019 Kentucky Derby unforgettable is not just the ruling itself, but the question it forced the sport to face. What does it actually mean to win? For generations, the answer felt simple. The winner is the horse in front when the race is over, the one who reaches the wire first, the one who claims the roar, the image, the moment. But this derby exposed a harsher truth. It said that getting there first is not enough if the path to that finish damages the fairness of the race. That changed more than one result. It changed the emotional contract between the sport and its audience. It turned victory from a visible fact into an official interpretation. It forced fans to choose between what they saw and what the rulebook declared. And once a sport asks its audience to mistrust the finish line, even for valid reasons, something deep is disturbed. That is the true legacy of this race. Not just controversy, not just debate, revelation. It exposed the fracture between first at the wire and first in history, and it showed how far apart those two things can really be. Officially, the answer is settled. Country House won the 2019 Kentucky Derby. The stewards made the call. The record book accepted it. The law left it standing. But official answers are not always the ones people carry home. Sports live in memory as much as they live in history, and memory is rarely obedient, because on the track, under all that pressure, under all that noise, under the weight of the biggest race in America, it was maximum security who got there first. That is the image many fans never released. To them, the winner was the horse they saw claim the moment before the replay room intervened. That is why this derby still feels unfinished. It lives in two worlds at once. One belongs to the official history of the sport. The other belongs to the emotional memory of the people who watched it happen. Derby history has an official winner, but in the minds of fans, the argument may never cross the wire. Maybe that is why this derby still hurts. The result was settled. The feeling never was.